I think the name relics came from some discussions too.
Yeah.
What we were going to do initially, there was an idea of having really rusted objects.
We could call it garbage. We could call it fragments of Detroit's past. It just seemed like the best name.
It's really the birthplace of industry, so it's really rich, and it's rich in that sense. This area is, and like any other American city at the same time.
We've never worked together before, but we've talked a lot about the experience of going out on your own into these buildings, and especially going into one for the first time, where you encounter such a overload of information. There's so much stuff in them. There's so much history, and just everything's falling apart. The paint is now fragmented into a million little chips of paint. Everything is just input. It's pixelated almost. So the idea for this piece a lot of it came about from the feelings you get when you're out there, experiencing Detroit in that way. It's very overwhelming. It's an intense experience. We're not necessarily trying to recreate that, but we did want to give a sense of overwhelming information.
Like, that's close to the kernel of the idea when we were first talking about this, that we wanted to get at, is sort of arrest people when they come in.
When you walk into our piece, it doesn't matter what you were thinking beforehand, and it doesn't matter what's going to happen, but for that instant, you should be affected enough to really be in the present moment, not realizing anything else, whatever you've been thinking. Suddenly, there's so much more information that it's taking over the present moment, and that's really important. People are attracted to certain boxes and say things like, hey, I want that box when you're done, or, can I buy 2 boxes, or whatever. But the room is a piece. It's one installation.
Then from that, you can divide it into 600 different little ideas that sometimes they may be kind of political, as some of the boxes are. Sometimes they're very personal, relate to, ourselves personally or people we know. And sometimes they're looking at something on a cultural level.
These are objects from the past. You see so many derelict buildings and so much just waste and everything turning back into, or going through cycles of death and rebirth.
Yeah, set it. From the finish. Ready? Go.
Well, we chose these particular rooms because prior to coming to the museum at all to do this installation, we had many, many tours of the building and all of its cavities. So we actually spent a week really probing every place in the museum to find places that felt like they had some inspiration for us.
We did some research on the history of the building and who the curators were at a certain time, Paul Cray being the architect, Valentina being one of the earlier curators of the museum. So we tried to, almost a bit of detective work, kind of going through different phases of different people who were involved in this place. And then for ourselves, we narrowed it down to 2 areas, which was the Great Hall, and we're calling it the Tintoretto Room, which is the ancient Italian art room. We had the opportunity during our visits to actually get inside the this suspended barrel vault.
It's all kind of black and white up there and very contrasted. Even with the color camera, it looks like it's a black and white thing.
We felt, for us, with our backgrounds, felt like a Piranesi drawing. It's sort of like Charles Dickens. I mean, there was this wonderful thing that was happening up there. I mean, a great contrast between the two spaces. Our intention is to share with everyone construction methods. When you see the image, you'll see how many people were involved in making this. It's quite decorative here. It's a totally different picture on the other side of it, and that's what we're aiming to show there.
This exhibit's about the history of Detroit, it's celebrating 300 years of Detroit. And what we would like to celebrate in that is the makers of the city, the makers of the architecture, and specifically here, the makers of this building. It seems like the architecture has in it like a lot of the clues and hints of history at the time.
What we try to focus on, not just the building, it's actually the construction materials.
The materials that seem to be most prevalent here that we find is stone-based material. So plaster, gypsum, some of the walls that are non-structural are made of a gypsum block, and they're not made that way anymore, but in that time, that's what they were made of. And these walls are of course made of marble, and then there's the plaster detailing, incredible plaster detailing, which is a stone derivative in the Tintoretto room. There were times in the past, like in this museum, where there were people who were inspired people. I mean, are the stories of Valentina and Paul Kray working together, an architect and a visionary for a museum. I mean, there was sparks there in the 1920s, and that may inspire whatever happens now.
I had come earlier to do some other projects that were just very loose ideas. I didn't know what I was going to do, but one was really overtly biographical, and it was to go to the offices of my hometown newspaper, which was like the Wayne Westland Eagle, and to shoot pictures out of the bound newspaper copies of what I thought constituted local culture, and it was a way to kind of examine my roots. I wanted just to have this kind of archive of the kinds of things that I grew up with that would have constituted culture to me as like in America and living in that place in that time. So I just shot out of these newspapers all these stories and photographs related to local culture, and that was really broad what that was like. And then the other project was I just decided to hire a man to take me in his boat to every island in the Detroit River. So it was kind of this fantasy exploration. Like, I had never been to any of these islands except Boblo Island, and I didn't know how many there were or what they were like. And so also it was something that was really outside of my experience, like growing up in the suburbs and in Detroit. While I was going to those islands, I discovered this one island that seemed to have been a dump site in the 20s or 30s because it was all very old material in which all paper kinds of products or wood things had rotted away, and it was just glass and ceramics. And so I kept thinking about this material, and when I was approved to do this this project here, I decided that material would make up my sculpture. And at that time I didn't really know what that sculpture would be, but I was going to use this material. So I decided to just make the statue based on this one that was at my high school. And I went to John Glenn High School, and there was a statue in the library, and I based it on that statue. So it's twice the size. But it's not really important to me that it's John Glenn per se. It's just the kind of figure you would see a public sculpture of. And to use this stuff taken out of the river that represents the past, that represents a kind of, in a kind of archaeological sense, this community, even though it's junk, it still kind of signifies the historical in a kind of really broad way. And so I had a cultural connection. I mean, I didn't grow up in the downtown part of the city, but I was I came down to go to music concerts and see art shows, and I was connected with it in that way. But in another sense, I was also part of this suburban culture, and it's also a very segregated city. So, and especially when you look at these newspaper things, it's like there's hardly any people of color in them, which is amazing because the very next, suburb, Inkster, is primarily black. And so I thought that was an interesting thing. So this whole thing about what a Detroiter is, of course, becomes a really loaded subject later on. But at that time, it didn't seem to be such a thing to me, because a lot of the things I was interested in and involved with were more mixed, because that was also part of that whole kind of hippie thing, was that things were all mixed up and cultures were all mixed up, and you didn't pay much attention to that kind of stuff because everybody was kind of trying to escape their own culture. Detroit also, to me, in a way, is more of a mythic place. I'm not involved in it as a real city anymore, It's like I can only talk about this period then, and that's the only thing I really feel comfortable talking about. And I have to treat it, in a certain sense, as mythic, because it's gone, and history is like a story. History is like a narrative, and you create it. And I'm trying to foreground that idea too, and maybe that's why I put a lot of this ridiculous kind of things in there too, to make people know that the construction of this history is not to be taken real seriously, like it's true in one sense, but it's fiction in another sense.
Thank you, Lenny.
Poop Deck Paul was a good friend of Captain Jolly, and he would take over the show on Saturdays.
Welcome back, boys and...
Hey, Soupy! Hey, Soupy!
Hey, Pookie.
Hi, how you doing, Poop?
How you doing?
Hey, Poopy! Hey! What's new, Soupy? I miss you, Poopy.
I missed you too, Pookie.
Give me a kiss. Mwah! Oh! Yeah!
Growing up here, I was born in 1955, and I grew up on Heidelberg Street. And during that time, when I was a kid, it was a very diverse neighborhood. And over the years, it took on a lot of changes for the worse. And I remember the 1967 riots. I was 12. And at that time, I thought the world was coming to an end. And that really affected my life, because there were times that I talk about the 1967 riots. For me, it's something that I would never forget. And if I sit here talking about it, I can still see it in my head. The city engulfed in fire, the National Guards coming in, helicopters, tanks. At night, I remember seeing the bullets and the gunshots, hearing the gunshots and the traces of the bullets traveling up and down the streets. And it was a war right here in the city. I've been having a big problem dealing with city government and having them to try to say what's art and what's not art. And I decided that one day I would use campaign posters in my project until that opportunity came. Myself, I've been fighting with government, trying to prove a point. And I saw where government was trying to say what's art and what's not. And I think it's going to take the visionaries that's going to help to jumpstart and to resurrect the city. So I'm talking about the artists, the architects, musicians, and writers, and so forth.
I felt somehow related to the first Irish people that moved to Detroit. I don't know why. My heart kind of went out to them because I've read so many of the stories and what have you of the women, especially the Irish women that came here, and the difficulties is unbelievable. So I tried very hard to imagine what it would be like for them. And I knew, of course, my great-grandmothers, all of their stories. And I was very interested in the churches over there because I knew that was the one thing that they held very dear and that made them feel like home was the Catholic Church. What I actually did was I made this small altar and it's actually a box. You may not be able to see that from the front view. And I love your chapel there. I wanted definitely to do it in the chapel. And what I thought I would have loved to have had would have been some letters, or if they had written something of just a memory, a thought of just what their ideas were, what they were most consumed with, or what they hoped for, etc. How did they feel being transplanted? So what I did with my piece was I made it this box, and I made it a woman, but the woman has turned her back to the viewer and to in the sculpture, and I put her head in the wall because they don't have a voice. They didn't leave me anything that's tangible. And I covered it with cherry blossoms because that's a sign of new life, new beginnings in Japan. And then we're draping it with beautiful satin, pink underneath and white on top, that gives it just a little bit of color. And I'll show a little bit because I felt that they could probably only show or be a little of what they were. They probably had to be very diligent in trying to get their children raised, etc. That was their main focus. And the other thing we're hoping to do is in a week or 2 weeks after the show opens, I'm hoping to seal that room up, actually, and cover the wall with wood that will be painted the same color as the stone, and only at that point give people little pinholes looks. So some will look at the flowers on the floor, some will just look at maybe her head or part of the base, and that's how we look at history. So first it's clear, and then it's not.
In Los Angeles, almost 10 years ago, I initiated the first art park, La Tierra de la Culebra, a 2-acre vacant piece of land, which engaged originally about 35 young teens in the idea that they could in fact transform a vacant, fallow garbage dump into an artful contribution to their community. The art park in Detroit was actually an interesting revisiting of how Culebra began. We did not have a very large budget, and it made us, I think, make the imagination and the notion of creating something from, taking nothing and turning it into something that became a community asset. There we worked with Detroit Summer, which had a varietal age range of teens from around the city, but as well many college students, both from the city as well as from around the country, to contribute to this rapid transformation of this piece of land, which will become the link, the catalyst, and hopefully the glue for the community and the school, and the new base for organizations in the community to continue enhancing, growing, and establishing programming and ongoing relationships.
The work that Detroit Summer does in terms of preparing the kids to go out and do these site projects that they do was very apparent within a couple of days. And it was so interesting to see how quickly they became a part of the group and really got a very strong sense of ownership of the work, and the work was completely collaborative. I mean, we didn't go in with an idea about this is what the art park is going to look like, now we're going to do it. It was very much a collaboration between Tricia and myself and Ashley Kuiper and the youth. And so that was kind of our first kind of bonding experience, was the artists with the Detroit Summer kids, and then they went out first and conducted oral histories in the neighborhood, trying to learn some of the history, introduce themselves.
This is an animation of Fast Forward Playback that was completed by Chris Pomodoro, and this animation helped us to design the exhibit and to communicate to others our intentions before it was actually completed. The installation is sited in the Kresge reception area, and one ascends into this space via a stair at the corner of the square atrium. It has a balcony which allows people to overlook the central space, and surrounding the space itself are 18th century French objects and paintings. We were interested in this space both for its spatial qualities and for the exhibit that is there permanently, as we think about that as the world of Cadillac, who came to Detroit in 1701 and is considered the founder of the city. We were interested in trying to look at the ephemeral and invisible things that affect our experience of the city. And the things that we focused on were the idea of memory and space and place in the city, and memory and identity. We particularly became interested in the ideas of erasure and rewriting and writing again as an analogy to the people who have moved in and out of the city over the last 300 years. We chose to focus on a school building, an elementary school, as a particularly interesting example within the city of this phenomenon, since the school itself is relatively stable and it has the kinds of spaces that we all recognize, such as a hallway or a gym or an auditorium, yet at the same time it has school children just naturally go through it, pass through its walls, and are replaced by a new set of school children. My partner, Peter Sparling, is a dancer, and he went to the elementary school that we chose to work with, Dawson Elementary School. And he choreographed a dance which was performed in the school itself in 5 different spaces in the school, and the 5 monitors that you see there play 5 programs that Terry Saris did, situated in each of those school rooms.
Computer and gym. Math. Miss Burley. Gym and science. That's reading, that's reading. Math. Math, gym, and computers.
Reaching for things. Oh my gosh, and always, of course, wondering, do I know the answer to this? Should I raise my hand? Am I going to be called on? Do I know the answer to this? Should I raise my hand? Do I know the answer to this? Should I raise my hand? Am I going to be called on? Do I know the answer to this? Should I raise my hand? Am I going to be called?
I want to be a college student and graduate and get my college degree and bachelor's degree. I want to be an artist or sing or act. I want to be a photographer. I want to be a designer. A singer. I want to be a pediatrician. A doctor. A veterinarian. Engineer.